Welcome, Bruchim Aba'im. I am Rabbi Paul, your virtual rabbi, and this is Vasya, your virtual rabbi's cat, and you have found Beit Virtuali. And yes, I have no idea how long he's going to stay here, but because he is a very, very sick cat, and if he wants to be with his kitty daddy while I am filming, then he's going to be here as long as he wants. So today is part 2 of a video from last week where I talk about how I, as a rabbi who has Reform origins, uses the word Hashem, which is usually associated with Orthodoxy. Video first link down below. Also the podcast second link down below from this last weekend. Katrin and I went into a much deeper dive on that question itself. But this week I want to go in a different direction, even though it's related. This entire idea of the names that we use of the divine, I think, is incredibly important. And I know it doesn't always seem like it's important. I think it's actually one of the most essential theological elements of Judaism. And so I wanted to do a second video just to address that one. And the way to get there, I'm going to start off with 3.5 pointers, ideas, stories that are going to get us in the direction that I want to go, hopefully. The first one is a memory of my dad teaching me how to drive. And I remember actually very clearly we were driving towards the interstate and we had to go on a small 2-lane highway that was under construction, and the sides of the road narrowed down to almost nothing, and we were in his Nissan truck, and it just, I'm sure there was no more than an inch or two on either side, and my dad just looked at me and he said, "Don't look to the left, don't look to the right, look straight ahead, because if you start looking to the left, you're going to drift to the left. If you start looking to the right, the point is obvious." Quite related to that is an idea that many of us who have dealt with youth education in one way or another, something that we learn pretty quickly, and that is if a child is running in a place that it's not safe for them to run or that they shouldn't be running, the thing to call out is not "don't run." Instead, we call out "walk." The idea is something that's part of neurolinguistic programming, that the command that the brain hears is, well, the verb. And so if you say "don't run," what the brain is actually hearing is "run." And if you say "walk" instead, then that's what the brain is hearing. If you don't believe me, watch the great Rabbi Darren Brown, who of course is not Jewish and not a rabbi, but he's one of my great teachers, and you will see how this works in just about everything that he does. Thank you, Vasya, for helping with the video. The third pointer is the one time that I won an argument at yeshiva. Now, I say I won an argument at yeshiva. What I actually mean is that the incredibly brilliant teachers who were unbelievably tolerant of my questions one time said, "Nice point." So what was the point that I made where they said "nice point"? We had been studying a passage out of Tractate Sukkot, so Masechet Sukkot, the part of the Babylonian Talmud that deals with the holiday of Sukkot. And there's a passage in there that says essentially that when you pray, you should pray in a positive voice. And a few days later, we were studying the Birkat HaShachar, so the morning blessings. And in the traditional formulation of the Birkat HaShachar, there are 3 different blessings that instead of praying in the positive voice, they're in the negative voice. Shelo asani goy, shelo asani avet, shelo asani isha. Who has not made me one of the nations, who has not made me a slave, and who has not made me a woman. Now, obviously, other than the cringe factor of that third one, and I think that it actually means something different than what we actually think it means, nonetheless, these have been changed quite obviously in nearly all progressive prayer books and some conservative prayer books, and the formulation usually falls into some area of She'asani Yisrael, She'asani ben Chorin, She'asani Betzalmo, who has made me a Jew, or who's made me into one who is obligated to argue with God, the better translation of that, I think, who has made me a free person, and who has made me in God's own image. And you see how all these 3 are related through neurolinguistic programming, through NLP. And just to kind of tie it together, I know that things like hypnotism and NLP aren't always the most comfortable subjects in the world. All NLP is understanding that language is powerful. I think we know that. And that by using certain words, we can point ourselves and others in a specific direction, and those directions can be profound. And one of my NLP books, there's a story at the very beginning of it, and it's a child who asks their parent, "What is NLP?" And the parent says, "Okay, I'll tell you, but first of all, go ask your grandfather how he's doing." The child goes, asks the grandfather how he's doing. The grandfather's sitting there in pain, not doing very well, says, "This is going wrong, this is going wrong, this is going wrong with my body." So the child goes back, reports what was said, and then asks, what was NLP? And the mother says, okay, great, I will still tell you, but first of all, go back and ask your grandfather to tell you about the most wonderful thing that's ever happened to him. So the child goes back and asks the question. The grandfather just perks up and smiles and gets, well, doesn't look quite as miserable as with the first question, and actually talks about an incident with that child's life. And so the child goes back and reports what was said and then asks the question again. So tell me, what's NLP? And the parent says, well, that's NLP. And if we are so affected by language, then how much more so the language of prayer, the language when we are attempting to break down our barriers of consciousness and find ourselves into a place of elevation, a place of lifting ourselves up, hopefully lifting others up as well. And that's the crux of why the names of God are so important. They're not names. They're pointers. They're pointers that will take us in a certain direction if we let them, if we're aware of what they are, if we're aware of what they're really about. So there are two stories in the Torah that show us that this is not a new idea. It's not just a modern idea. It's not a postmodern idea. It's not a Kabbalistic idea. It's not a Hasidic idea, that this is central to Torah itself. And there are two different narratives where the narrative has the Eternal playing the name game. And the first one is towards the beginning of the book of Exodus. It's in Parshat Va'era. Moses is talking with the Eternal, and the Eternal says, all right, your ancestors knew me as El Shaddai, but you're going to know me as, and then the Tetragrammaton, the Yud-He Vav-He, the four-letter ineffable name of God, is presented. Now, El Shaddai means the God who protects the doorposts of the house, or the God who nourishes. In this passage, the Eternal is essentially saying, I used to be known as having a power, a specific dominion, in this case, the dominion of your house, to protect your house. But that's not what I am at all. I'm something much bigger, much less limited than that. And the better pointer to that is the other discussion where Moses says, tell me your name. And God replies with something that's not a name. Now, first of all, why did Moses do this? Tell me your name. So in the Canaanite pantheon of gods, as well as in the Egyptian pantheon of gods and the Babylonian pantheon of gods, so the various different pantheons that would have affected the collective consciousness of the Jewish people or the evolving Hebrew people, every god's name or goddess's name was an aspect of their dominion. In other words, if you knew the name of a god, you knew what their power was. In the Canaanite pantheon, this was very literal. You would have the Baal this, Baal that, and the that underneath that would be the name of a river or rivers or water or the name of a specific mountain. And so if someone says, I worship Baal, fill in the blank, then you would say, oh, okay, you worship the God who has specific dominion over this. And so it only makes complete sense that Moses was saying, please tell me what your power is, because I'm about to go back and talk to these people that are enslaved, and they need to know that they are giving their faith to a deity who has the power to do something. Well, the answer is nothing what Moses is expecting. He's asking this question, and the answer is over here, and they have nothing to do with each other, because the answer is Iye Asher Iye. Usually translated as I am what I am, or I am that I am. It's actually much bigger than that, because Iye is a first person, future, singular version of the verb to be. So Iye Asher is a conjunction, usually translated as that. So I am that I am. But the way that tenses work in the Torah can be a little bit complicated, and essentially this could be future, present, or past tense. So you can translate that as I am what I am, or I am what I was what I will be, or I will be what I was. In other words, I'm not a name. Don't ask me my name. You want to know what my power is, and I'm telling you, I'm everything. More bluntly is, you want to think of me as a grand extension of a human being, and I'm not that. It took 1,500 years for a leader in Judaism to formulate this as a principal article of how we interact with our religion, with our spirituality, with our understanding of the divine. In the third principle of Maimonides' 13 principles, we read, Ani ma'amim be'emunah shlema, I believe with perfect faith, shehabore yitbrach shemo eno guf, that the Creator, blessed be the name of the Creator, is not physical, velo yasgihu masige haguf, that no physical attributes can be applied to the Creator, ve'en lo shum dimyon klal, and that there's nothing whatsoever that can be compared to the divine. Moses, in the world that brought forth Torah, understood God exactly as having specific human-like attributes. We weren't alone. Everyone does this. doesn't mean that every religious tradition is backwards. Many traditions understand these attributes as symbolic, but I'm not sure that we really do a good job of that. I'll give you an example. Just go to a Torah study, or remember back to a Torah study you've been to. Go to a Torah study, and this is going to happen more often outside of Orthodoxy. And that's not pejorative, that's just that questions tend to be of a different flavor outside of Orthodoxy. But just wait until we get to one of the passages that are highly problematic. And yes, there are highly problematic passages in Torah. And invariably, someone at the study is going to say, I don't understand why God did that. If we take Maimonides seriously, then we should have recognized the moment that it came out of our mouth that we just said God and to do. That is anthropomorphizing. That is turning God into an extension of how we understand humanity. And the Torah is trying to do exactly the opposite of that, as is Maimonides. Stop thinking of God as a dude or a dude-ess. Stop thinking of God as a figure, as a human, as anything with human attributes. God is a symbolic placeholder, that name for something much greater. The universe and everything that is combined in the universe and all laws of the universe, plus an unknowable something else, the Ein Sof. But invariably, this is the place that we go, is the why did God do that? And our religion and many other religions are built around either fully embracing what God did or fully rejecting a religion based on what we perceive God did. And the way that I always try to step in and help in that moment is, the question is not, why did God do that? The question is, why did the writers and the narrators and the editors of the Torah decide to formulate it that way? Or if that is a little bit too difficult and a little bit too academic, how about what are we supposed to learn about ourselves, our relationship with each other, and our relationship with the divine through that passage? One of the great canards that I will hear is, well, if God was so moral, then why didn't God just forbid slavery instead of Torah talking about slavery all the time? And a question like that is always formulated from the moral superiority of the year 2021, where we would never have such things, which is an absolute, complete, utter, total lie, because go around the corner in any city and you will find slavery. And so instead of saying, oh, why wasn't God moral enough in order to be able to prevent such a thing? How about we look at our tradition as the thing that points us to understanding the attributes, even the unsavory ones, with which we engage on a daily basis. So getting back to the name of God, or the names of God, well, on the one hand, they're completely necessary. I've said this in many classes. If I was to be the most honest possible about the question or answering the question, what is the nature of God? Here's the answer that I can give. But that doesn't help very much, does it? The wordlessness, the second that I add a single word, I've put God in a box. So the answer that Judaism has given over time is twofold. Number one, to have many names of God that deal with the aspirational aspects of our relationship with each other in the universe. So when we're in a time of war, we'll talk about Adonai Tzevaot, the God of the hosts of heaven. When we are in desperate need of mercy, we will call out the attributes of Chesed, Rachamim. When we feel like we're under attack, we'll call out on El Shaddai. And all the time, the Torah is saying, okay, that's fine. And I'm going to include it, try to teach it, try to help understand its place. But the only truth is I have no attributes. I am simply all of existence. And even using the word I here is difficult. As Lawrence Kushner formulates, God is the eye of the universe. And hopefully we can start recognizing that that's too big of an I to see this in any human terms whatsoever. So back to last week's video. Why do I use Hashem, even sometimes outside of prayer? And the answer is because it's not a name. It's clearly not a name. Hashem, as a word, is beautiful because it means the name. It's meta. It's not a name. It is a pointer to the name of the universe. There's a great Jewish tradition that if you were to read the entire Torah from beginning to end in one breath, then you would have read another name of God. That's not literal. What it's meant is to get us out of the place where, like Moses, we think God is an extension of humanity. But yet after God says, my name is Yeh Asher Yeh, what does Moses do? He goes back and says, hey, everyone, I want to introduce you to the God that's going to help us get out of slavery. His name is Yeh Asher Yeh, and look at what I just did there across the board. Oh, no. The lesson we were supposed to learn is to elevate ourselves from putting God or gods or goddesses in a box and understanding ourselves and divinity as a mere extension of oftentimes the worst parts of ourselves. We had this opportunity earlier in our tradition instead to understand that when we engage in acts of ritual and acts of worship, it is to get us to remove the boundaries that force us to see ourselves as small, that force us to see each other as small, that force us to see the world as small. Instead, the pointer was supposed to be that we're all interconnected, that we're all part of something magnificent and big, and it's bigger than all of us combined, but we all touch it. We're all a part of it. So back to the NLP. When we refer to the divine, the words that we use are important then. There's a reason that almost everyone who's ever seen me as a congregational rabbi, if you ever hear me use gender associated with divine, like I just did a few seconds ago, it's to make a point. And the point is, don't go there. And I'm not even making the point about gender that one would expect in the year 2021. I'm making the point that even that narrows God, whether male, female, whether we put any of those attributes in there, it still makes God into a human being. And then we understand that as an extension. Even something like God is love, I think is incredibly limiting. Because when we say God is love, then we are comparing God to what we think love is. And as human beings, we evolve in our understanding of love. And for many of us, love is tiny, narrow ideas. My idea of love when I was 3, 5, 10, 15, 20, 49 now, hopefully has evolved over time, but it's still not infinite. And so if I limit God even by a beautiful attribute, I'm still limited God to my understanding of that. In other words, God becomes an extension of my ego. And so because I can't just sit in silence when someone asks a question about divinity and I'm required to use words, names, then what I'm going to do is try to choose as much as possible names that aren't really names, or names that at least NLP can push us to think in a specific direction. So in English, I will almost always say the eternal. In Hebrew, sometimes I'll say Hashem. Sometimes I'll make other choices. I will quote our texts accurately, but when I translate them, just like the translation of Maimonides that I did earlier, I will remove all gender from them because I don't want us to be pointed in the direction of humanity. So what's the big deal? What's the danger? Well, the danger is the amount of people that I've talked to, and I know that I'm not alone in this one, who have said that they don't want to engage in any aspect of Judaism because they don't know how to pray to a God who would act that way in the Torah or some variation of that. In other words, they've rejected a God that isn't the God that exists in Torah. It doesn't mean that the Torah formulates it horribly. It means that we are horribly, poorly made for actually understanding something outside of our experience, our filters. The worst case scenario is you get to one of my absolute favorite quotes by Richard Dawkins. Let me read this for you so you can enjoy this with me. From The God Delusion we read, the God of the Old Testament is arguably the most unpleasant character in all of fiction, jealous and proud of it, a petty, unjust, unforgiving control freak, a vindictive, bloodthirsty ethnic cleanser, a misogynist, homophobic, racist, infanticidal, genocidal, filicidal, pestilential, megalomaniacal, sadomasochistic, capriciously malevolent bully. Okay, fine, I can find the passages in the Torah to back up what he's saying, but it so profoundly misses the point. And until we get out of this idea that God is just like us, only bigger, then we're going to miss the entire point of Torah. We're certainly going to miss the utility, if not the beauty, of our religious traditions. So yeah, the names of God that we use are incredibly important. We have to be conscious of what we do. That was the entire idea behind these two passages in the Torah, not just to get Moses to stop and us to stop thinking of God as an idol, to stop thinking of God as our ancestors considered God. To even say a word like God and understand that that's a placeholder for something different. It's the best we can do. Dibra Torah, Kalashon B'nai Adam, Torah speaks to us in the language of humankind. We don't have better words, but we have the potential for better consciousness. If I want God to be small and petty, then it's easy to put God in that box. That's not the pointer that we're being given in our tradition, but we have to work at it. We have to hear ourselves when we say, why did God do that? And then take that deep breath and reformulate the question. When we get upset at the name of God that someone else uses, this is more about us than it is about them. They're on their own journey. We need to understand what we're saying and why. Are we aware of where we are trying to point ourselves via our words, what we're trying to say? Are we using God the same way we would use Bob or Jane? Or are we trying to formulate our words in a way that are going to elevate us? I really think that this makes a difference. I really think that the way that we engage with that which is greater than us points us to how we behave, how we see ourselves, how we see each other. To paraphrase Franz Rosenzweig with a little bit of Buber thrown in, the time of the Messiah is that time when we stop seeing everyone else as objects and we start seeing everyone as a subject. If we allow our God to be a petty tyrant instead of interconnecting tissue of the universe, then it's a lot easier for us to be a petty tyrant when it comes to how we treat others. With that, thank you for being a part of Beit Virtuali. Here's some great NLP for you. Hit that like button. If you've made it this far, I think I deserve a like button. If you're not subscribed to the channel, please do so. Turn on notifications. There's that little bell symbol right there. And if you want to keep in these dialogues and keep our podcasts going, then please consider becoming a member of Beit Virtuali through Patreon, link down below. In the meantime, let's live a slightly more deliberate life, more conscious through the words that we use, whether we're talking to and about each other or about that which binds us all together. In doing so, we have a little bit higher probability of lifting someone up today. The process of doing that lifts us all up. Thank you for being a part of Beit Virtuali. We'll see you next time.
בית ישראל, עמך אהבת. תורה ומצוות, חוקים, משפטים אותנו לימדת. תורה ומצוות, חוקים, משפטים